Okay, folks, welcome back. We like to dive deep, and today we're really going deep, deep into an ancient story.
Yeah.
The kind that's been told and retold for millennia. It's the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah, those cities.
Yeah. And we're going to be using excerpts from Lesson 18, Destruction of Sodom.pdf.
Okay.
And, our mission here, our goal, is to understand why these cities were destroyed.
Yeah.
What was it about them that was so bad? And what does it all tell us about, God and humanity, the big questions, right?
Right.
So, think about this for a second, right? When you hear words like depraved, perverted, wicked, morally degenerate, corrupt, evil, vile, to describe a place and its people, I mean, just what comes to mind? Because that's how Sodom is described.
Yeah, it's a pretty bleak picture.
Oh, yeah. It's pretty intense, and it makes you wonder, how strong would the pull have to be to get someone to leave a place like that? If that was your entire world, if that's all you knew.
Right. Yeah, it really makes you think about the forces at play, both within the individual and the society. And speaking of forces, as we delve into this powerful narrative, the source material really emphasizes the importance of understanding the nature of God.
Okay.
Right, because it's not just about the spectacle of destruction. There's this crucial tension that we need to grasp to really get it. This being who is holy and righteous and just, but also incredibly patient and merciful and wants things to be set right. That's a lot to hold together.
Yeah, that's a powerful combination.
It is. And the text frames this whole event within the context of a just judge who investigates before rendering judgment. So it's not impulsive or arbitrary. It's presented as a deliberate response based on knowledge and righteousness.
Okay, so let's kind of unpack this a bit by going through this story chronologically. Starting way back in Genesis, we have Lot, Abram's nephew, and he's got to choose where to settle down, right? Build his life.
Right.
And the Jordan Valley is described as well-watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. I mean, it sounds idyllic, doesn't it?
Yeah, fertile, prosperous, a land of abundance.
So naturally, he's drawn to that. He heads that way, ends up settling near Sodom, and then, step by step, he moves right into the city itself.
Okay.
But here's the thing that we can't overlook, even this early stage. Genesis 13 very clearly states that the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. That's like foreshadowing right there. It sets a pretty ominous tone.
It does. It's like this dark undercurrent right from the beginning. Lot's decision is based on this seemingly obvious prosperity and abundance, but he's placing himself right next door to a profoundly troubled community.
Right, and then fast forward to Genesis 19, we have the arrival of two figures described as angels in Sodom as evening falls. And Lot, he's sitting at the city gate, shows them hospitality, bows low, and urges them to stay at his home.
Interesting.
And it makes you think of that passage in Hebrews 13.2, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that some have entertained angels without knowing it. So it really begs the question, does Lot know who he was dealing with right from the start?
That's a great question. Did he have some sense, some inkling about their true nature the text doesn't explicitly say?
It's fascinating to consider. And then we get to this pivotal moment in Genesis 18 where God says, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me.
Powerful words.
And the source interprets this as a just judge in action, initiating an investigation before delivering a verdict, not just reacting out of anger, but following a process.
That makes sense. And what's really striking here is the emphasis on the outcry. The Hebrew word used, za'aka, conveys this sense of a desperate cry for help. It's like a plea from those suffering under oppression.
So it's not just noise, it's a cry for justice.
Exactly. And the source clarifies that this outcry wasn't about one single issue. It was about a pattern of arrogance, a hoarding of resources, and indifference to the vulnerable and what's termed sexual abomination, which we see later clearly includes acts of violence. So it wasn't just a few bad apples. This outcry points to a deeply embedded systemic corruption within the city.
And then we see this corruption play out in the next scene in a very graphic way. The men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surround Lot's house and demand that he bring out his visitors so they can know them.
It's a chilling scene.
It really is. And that phrase, know them, it's a euphemism for sexual assault and the sheer universality of the demand. All the people to the last man, it just shows how pervasive this moral decay had become. It wasn't hidden. It was the very fabric of their society.
Absolutely. It wasn't some fringe group. It was the entire population. And then Lot's response, while maybe rooted in protecting his guests under his roof, it's definitely jarring to our modern sensibility. He offers his two virgin daughters to the mob, saying, "Do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. The source helps us understand this in the context of ancient Near Eastern customs, where protecting guests was paramount even above family. But still, it's a horrifying choice.
It's a stark reminder of how different cultural norms can be and how challenging it can be to interpret these ancient texts.
Right.
And the Sodomites' reaction is telling. They don't suddenly see reason or show empathy. Instead, they turn on Lot, questioning his right to judge them as an outsider and threaten to treat him even worse than his visitors. They become violent, pressing against the door about to break it down. This escalation really highlights the complete lack of any moral compass within Sodom.
It's like all sense of order and decency has completely eroded, and it's at this point that the narrative takes a very clear supernatural turn. The two visitors, now clearly more than just men, they intervene, they pull Lot back inside, secure the door, and then strike the mob outside with blindness, leaving them disoriented and groping for the entrance they were just attacking.
So this is where it becomes undeniable that something otherworldly is happening.
Exactly, and the source suggests that this act further confirms their angelic nature, aligning with other biblical accounts of angelic intervention.
Okay, so this dramatic shift leads to the angel's urgent warning to Lot. They tell him to gather any remaining family, sons-in-law, sons, daughters, anyone connected to him, and get out because the city is about to be destroyed.
And here we see the tragic consequence of Sodom's influence. Lot goes to his sons-in-law to warn them to flee because the city's about to be obliterated, but they just laugh it off.
Wow.
They dismiss it as a joke. It shows how deeply ingrained the city's wickedness and disbelief had become. Even those closest to Lot couldn't grasp the reality of the coming judgment. It's a stark illustration of how a corrupt environment can blind people to the truth.
Chilling, and then as dawn breaks, the angels become even more insistent. They practically drag Lot, his wife and daughters, out of the city. But Lot hesitates. He lingers almost as if he's still tied to this life he's known.
It's a powerful image of how hard it can be to break free, even when facing imminent danger.
And the source emphasizes the mercy shown here. The angels physically take them by the hand and lead them out of the city to safety. Lot's reluctance really highlights how seductive familiarity and comfort can be, even in a corrupt system.
It's a profound insight into human nature.
Yeah, and then comes the cataclysmic event. Once Lot reaches the safety of Zoar, God unleashes a rain of sulfur and fire upon Sodom and Gomorrah from the heavens, utterly destroying the cities. The entire valley, all its inhabitants, and even the vegetation, its complete annihilation.
A truly awe-inspiring and terrifying event.
And the source mentions that this event could be linked to natural phenomena like volcanic activity and the release of gases, suggesting a potential natural mechanism alongside the divine judgment.
That's an interesting point. It suggests a possible interplay between natural forces and divine action.
And amidst this destruction, we have the tragic story of Lot's wife defying the angel's explicit instructions. She looks back and is instantly turned into a pillar of salt. It's a stark reminder of the consequences of disobedience and clinging to the past. It speaks to the danger of divided loyalties when you have to make a clean break.
A powerful and haunting image.
And the next morning, Abram, who's back in Canaan, looks towards where Sodom and Gomorrah once stood and sees smoke billowing up like a flaming furnace. It's a vivid image of utter destruction.
It really drives home the finality of the event.
Absolutely. So when we put it all together, as our source says, this is fundamentally the story of a city consumed by its own sin and the resulting divine judgment.
And it's important to note that this wasn't just about punishment. The text makes it clear that this was a lesson for Abraham, a foundational understanding of the way of the Lord, which includes both righteousness, living by a moral standard, and justice, establishing fairness and equity.
Right, it's about setting a precedent.
Exactly. The source draws a parallel to the divine judgment after the flood, reinforcing this consistent principle of divine action against widespread wickedness.
So God is shown to be holy and just in both instances.
And the source emphasizes that God's holiness means he's fundamentally separate, inherently righteous and just, which sets him apart from other deities in the ancient Near East who might have been called holy but didn't necessarily have a strong moral code.
So there's a higher standard.
Yes, and because of this inherent holiness, there's an expectation for followers to strive towards that same moral standard.
Okay, so the flood narrative had already demonstrated God's intolerance for violence and corruption, and after that event, humanity was specifically tasked with curbing violence.
Right. Genesis 9:6 states, "Whoever sheds the blood of man by man, shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image." So violence against another human is a direct offense against God.
And so the events at Sodom can be seen as a continuation of this principle, the sanctity of human life and the rejection of its violation.
Precisely. And it makes you think about societies today. Are there parallels? Are we ignoring the outcry of the vulnerable? Are we perpetuating systems of violence and injustice?
Those are tough questions, but important ones to ask.
Yep.
And it's important to remember, as the source points out, that this narrative isn't solely about wrath and retribution. It's about a complex interplay of divine attributes, holiness, righteousness, justice, but also grace and patience.
Right. It's a balancing act.
God was incredibly patient before the flood, granting humanity 120 years. And even with Sodom, the angels urged Lot and his family to escape and even intervened to physically remove them from the city.
So there's this constant tension between judgment and mercy.
Absolutely. And that outcry against Sodom, that desperate za'ak, it came from a multitude of sins: arrogance, the hoarding of wealth, coupled with indifference to the needy and violent sexual perversion.
A complete breakdown of morality.
While God announced an investigation, the angel's swift and decisive action suggests that he already knew the full extent of the situation.
Makes sense the investigation might have been more for Abraham's benefit to understand God's justice.
And the source also highlights Lot's position as an elder in Sodom, likely due to his wealth, which suggests he wasn't oblivious to the violence happening around him.
Right, he was complicit in a way.
And while some might interpret the Sodomites' aggression towards the visitors as fear of spies, the text rightly questions how that explains Lot's offer of his daughters.
It just doesn't add up.
And the angel's supernatural ability to inflict blindness on the mob clearly points to their non-human nature.
No doubt about it.
Their insistence on immediate flight and allowing refuge in Zoar instead of the more remote mountains further emphasizes the imminence of the judgment and also the continuing patience of God.
So many layers to this story.
And as we pull all these threads together, the source delivers this powerful statement: there are limits to the patient endurance and mercy of a holy and just God. It argues that without God's commitment to justice, there would be no hope for the weak and vulnerable against overwhelming wickedness.
It's a sobering thought.
It is. And ultimately, the source concludes that the intertwining of God's mercy and justice offers hope for humanity, a hope that would be realized through Abraham's lineage.
So there's a glimmer of hope amidst the destruction.
Exactly. So for you, our listener, what are the key takeaways from this deep dive into the destruction of Sodom? We've seen a demonstration of divine holiness, unwavering justice, but also profound mercy and remarkable patience. The gravity of Sodom's sins led to a severe judgment, but even divine patience has its limits.
Right, and it prompts us to reflect on the broader observations about human nature presented in the source. This wasn't an isolated incident. The text connects it to the flood and the Tower of Babel, suggesting a recurring pattern of human moral failings throughout history.
So we're left with some pretty big questions about ourselves and the choices we make.
Exactly, both individually and as a society. What are we turning a blind eye to? What outcries are we ignoring?
It's a challenge to examine our own lives and our own communities in light of this ancient story.
And to consider what steps we can take to ensure that we're not repeating the mistakes of the past.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, I want to leave you with a final thought-provoking takeaway from the source material. It's from a section titled, "What Does God Want Me to Do?" And it simply says, don't play with fire when God tells you to run.
That's a powerful image.
It is. Think about what that means, not just in the context of Sodom, but in your own life. What warnings are you ignoring? What steps are you hesitant to take? What does it mean to truly heed the call to flee from danger and embrace a different path?
It's a call to action, a reminder that we have choices to make and that the consequences of those choices can be significant.
Absolutely. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. We hope it's given you much to think about.
And to act upon.
Indeed. Until next time.